My life fell apart in 1992. That's when I lost my son. His name was James, and he was 7 years old. My life wasn't good before that either. I cleaned rich people's houses for next to nothing, but at least I had my little boy. As long as I had him, I felt just as rich as the people I cleaned for. James was such a big part of my life that after I lost him, I lost myself. The day I lost him was perfectly normal. One of those days you wouldn't remember. We were at the grocery store. I left my son in line to the cashier to get something I'd forgotten. And when I came back, he was gone. No one had seen anything. And the CCTV had apparently been out of function for weeks. The police did what little they could do. My son's face was on the local news for some time, but no one recognized him. He was simply gone, and so was my will to live. I wanted to kill myself, out of sorrow and guilt, but my depression made me so apathetic that I couldn't even muster the strength to do that. Instead, my mind just shut down, and I entered a form of self-destructive autopilot. I watched myself fall down, saw myself tend to basic needs, eating, drinking, sleeping, without caring about anything else. Before I lost my job, one of the house owners who listened to my story offered to help me by giving me a job that would pay more for less work. I didn't have any self-worth. My autopilot, capable of nothing more than the minimum effort to survive, accepted the offer. So I watched myself fall, saw myself get dressed up, get out of my tiny apartment, stand on the side of the street. It's a big city, my new employer used to say, and it is thirsty. For 5 years, I watched myself fall without a care in the world. There was something strange in the air that night at the end of 1997. Something that made me tense up for the first time in a long time. It felt as if I was watched by someone other than myself, and I didn't like it. It felt wrong. My hair stood on end. My corner was next to a movie theater. Starship Troopers was playing. A large group of people stood outside. I usually shied away from the larger crowds when I worked, but this feeling of dread, made me want to cross the street and ask them for a light, just to be near somebody. Before I made up my mind about it, a black Cadillac DeVille with shaded windows slowly crawled up to me. Another customer, I thought. Rich one by the looks of the car. A tall man stepped out from the passenger seat. He has a chauffeur, I noted for myself indifferently. Very rich then. Better up my prices. He was in his 60s, I think. Not the oldest one I'd been with, but definitely somewhere up there. He wanted to shake my hand. One of the polite ones, I thought. I could usually read them, see if they were married and bored, or alone and desperate, if they were happy and careless, or unhappy and caring, or if they were submissive or dominant. But with this man, I usually don't view them as real men, so the fact that I want to use that word now is telling. He stood tall in front of me as a complete paradox, courteous but intimidating, fatherly but hostile, alluring but repulsive, a stranger but yet somehow familiar. My dead heart skipped a beat, and my voice trembled when I told him what I had to offer and for how much. "Yes," he said. "Poor girl, he must be freezing." Was he one of those who wanted to fall in love just for the night? I still couldn't tell. He had a thick dialect that I couldn't place. "I want something rather unusual," he continued. A pervert. I wouldn't have guessed, but I wasn't surprised. "I don't do weird shit," I said. Not that I cared that much. I just didn't know how to act in those kinds of super contrived situations. I was a whore, not an actress. Oh, he said, seemingly disappointed. Well, this is pretty weird, I'm afraid, but I'm willing to pay a lot. I locked eyes with him. His face was kind, but a scar that crossed his eye made him look threatening at the same time. I thought about it for a second and said, "How much are we talking about?" "Enough for you to never have to work this profession again." I laughed. "Don't be vague. Give me a number." He smiled, but only with his mouth, and said, $500,000. I choked on my own spit. For real? With that kind of money, I could retire, have a life, maybe even do something to help other people in my situation. Possibilities that I hadn't even dared to dream about flashed in my mind. For real, he said. He wouldn't have offered me all that money if he didn't want me to do something outrageous. Maybe he wanted me to do something illegal, something involving dead people, animals, or kids. Fuck that shit, I thought. No money in the world would make me do stuff like that. I hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Well, what the hell do you want me to do?" He smiled again, hopeful. "I haven't accepted yet," I added. "Why don't we go for a ride, and I'll try to explain. I can tell you right away that I'm not going to do some sick, like some pedo stuff or..." The man laughed. "No, it's nothing like that. That's horrible." "You have my curiosity, then," I said with a skeptic look. He opened the car door and held it open for me. "Please," he said. "If you don't feel up for it after I've told you, I'll understand and I'll let you off wherever you want." The man sat down next to me in the passenger seat. I buckled up. The driver never turned around to greet me. He was a dark silhouette against the traffic lights ahead. As he slowly drove away from my little corner of the street, the man cleared his throat and began speaking. "I'm not able to tell you the exact details, but I can promise you that you won't need to do anything disturbing. At least not in the way you would suggest." "You can't tell me, or you don't want to tell me?" I asked. He looked unsure, like he actually couldn't tell me, and said, "Does it matter?" "Well, what can you tell me?" He looked at his knees as if preparing himself to reveal a secret he's been carrying around for a long time. "It isn't that complicated. When we arrive at our destination, I'm going to give you a set of new clothes. When you put them on, I'll ask you to enter a building. I'll meet you inside of it, and after that, I can't tell you what will happen, but you'll understand what you have to do. I can promise you that." That feeling from earlier, the feeling of something being off, came back. Was I being lured into some kind of trap? But why this weird charade? It was easy to murder me. I wouldn't even resist. Maybe he wanted to torture me, keep me as some kind of slave. I shrugged at the thought of it. I couldn't make heads or tails of any of this. "You promise it's not illegal?" I asked, even though I had no reason to trust him, whatever he said. "And that I won't be harmed?" "It's nothing illegal," he said. 30 minutes later, the car stopped. The man sighed, but I couldn't tell if it was from relief or despair, and opened the door. "We are here," he said. We stepped out on the yard of an abandoned, run-down school. I hadn't been here before, but given the cityscape in the background, I could tell it was somewhere south of the city, and therefore most likely in one of the poor neighborhoods. Heavy snowflakes came down from the sky, painted orange by the streetlights. I heard the man open the trunk of his car as I stared at the empty school building. A sadness came over me, the same kind of sadness that always came over me when I saw something that had to do with children. It reminded me of James. "Here are the clothes," the man said. "Are you ready?" Sure," I stuttered. The way I saw it, both the worst-case scenario and the best-case scenario seemed equally appealing to me. "You can change inside the car. My driver will step outside." I took the clothes and returned to the car. The driver got out without being explicitly told to do so. It didn't make me feel any safer. "I guess he wants me to play dress-up games," I thought as I looked through the clothes. It was some kind of uniform, with black leather boots and a peaked cap to go. It had a yellowish color and a large eagle spreading its wings across the chest and at the front of the cap. I put everything on. I felt relieved that it had all been some kind of fetish. The man was clearly insane, paying me so much for some weird dominatrix roleplay. The yellow coat was a bit too large for me, but other than that, the uniform fit me perfectly. As soon as I exited the car, I felt somewhat embarrassed wearing these ridiculous clothes. The driver hurried inside the car again. "Wonderful," the man said. "Is it comfortable?" "At least it helps against the cold," I said. "What is this, some kind of Nazi uniform?" "You're thinking about the eagle?" he said. "It's not what you think. That's the Faravahar." "The what?" "It doesn't matter," he said. "All you need to do now is enter the door to the school. I'll meet you on the other side." "And then you'll give me $500,000? I asked. "Yes. Or do you need more?" No, I'll give you what you need. Don't worry. Do you want me to order you around in there and... "Something like that," he said. I took a step toward the school. "Wait," the man said. "There's one thing you need to know before you go inside." "Uh-huh." "It's an address." He gave me a piece of paper. I looked at it. It said, St. Nicholas Street, 45, 3rd floor, door to the left. I couldn't figure out what way this would play a part in this bizarre fantasy, but for $500,000, I guess I was ready to play along. "You'll understand the rest by yourself. Trust me. You are the only one that can understand." "I'll see you inside then," I said. Still feeling like an idiot wearing a uniform, I opened the front door to the school and walked inside. As soon as the doors closed behind me, a gust of wind blew the cap off my head. I leaned down and picked it up again, and as soon as I had put it back on my head, I heard an explosion in the distance. The man didn't follow me inside. I assumed he planned on entering the building from somewhere else, so I walked through the empty school corridors in an attempt to find him. Another explosion erupted outside. Fireworks? At this hour? I thought. "Hello?" I yelled. "Where the fuck are you?" I decided to try and get into the role. Who has been a naughty schoolboy? No response. After about 20 minutes, I began to think I had been pranked, which made me feel extremely stupid. I decided to return to the schoolyard and see if the man was still there. The sound of the heels of my boots hitting the floor echoed throughout the corridors. I stopped in my tracks when I reached the doors. There was some kind of commotion going on outside. And then I heard yet another explosion. This time, much closer. And then people began to cheer. I stood and listened for a long time. Without warning, someone opened the door. It was a young man, wearing a similar uniform as my own, but with a lower rank. "Major," he said and saluted me. Finally! He had the same odd dialect as the man. "Are you with reinforcements from the East Coast?" As he spoke, I hesitantly stepped outside. The sky was just as dark as before. The snow was gone, and it wasn't cold anymore. "What's going on?" I said to myself rather than to the young man. "We lost our commander a few days ago," he said as we walked toward a group of soldiers that surrounded what looked like a convoy of military vehicles, including a tank. "Our company was dropped pretty far behind checkpoint necessity 2 weeks ago, and since we've been fighting our way to our objective, but it's been a mess from day one, and now it's just 30 of us left. Luckily, we just intercepted the transport and—" I stopped listening. It was too much to take in. It felt as if I were dreaming, and yet I knew I was awake. The confusion made me dizzy. I turned around and looked back at the school. It didn't look like before. Now it looked like an ancient ruin, almost completely destroyed. And then I saw the bodies. A soldier was piling them up on the schoolyard. They were all wearing blue uniforms. "We got them good," the young man said. "And boy, are we happy to see you. Where's the rest of your company?" Company? I couldn't grasp what was happening around me. "Are you okay, ma'am?" I had no idea what to say. The old man had told me I would understand what to do, but this was completely insane. Did he drug me somehow? I asked myself. But then I saw them. The soldiers were leading them out of one of the captured trucks. A group of children. It only took a fraction of a second to recognize him. Even though he had a bandage covering one of his eyes, it was James. He was one of the children being led out of the truck. My confusion evaporated in an instant. I still didn't understand anything. I understood even less now. But my senses sharpened like a tiger locking onto its prey. "Ma'am?" the young soldier inquired. "The occupying forces sent you as reinforcement, yes?" I had to think quickly. What the fuck am I going to do? But I knew, just like the old man had said, even though I had no idea what had happened, I understood what to do. And it was true. I was the only person in the whole world that knew how important that boy was. To everyone else, would just have been a boy among other boys. For reasons impossible to understand, I had stepped out into a war zone and found my son, and now I had to save him. But how? The address, of course. "Listen," I said, trying to give my voice some authority. I did have a role to play after all. My company was shot down over—" I interrupted myself since I didn't know what place to pick. "3 of us survived," I continued, "but the other 2 got killed just a few miles from here. I'm sorry to bring you this bad news." I looked at the young man in the eyes. His disappointment was hard to miss. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry to hear that. It will be difficult to get out of here alive without reinforcement." He introduced me to the rest of his company. They were all young men, saluting me with pride in their eyes. They looked up to me, wanted me to be proud of their accomplishment. If they only knew who or what I really am, I thought. They had captured an elderly general, a man with silver gray hair wearing a blue uniform with 4 silver stars on it. Next to him, a soldier lay dead, just as young as the others. I wasn't able to reflect on it, but I saw an American flag on the side of his arm. There was a bang. One of the yellow soldiers had shot the general in the head. He wasn't going to tell us anything, they said. I stared at the body, trying to hide the horror I felt. What about the children?" I asked. "We don't know anything about them." one soldier said. I walked toward the children with decisive steps. I didn't want them to know about my relationship with my son, so I placed myself behind him and pretended to pay all of the children an equal amount of attention. I tried my best to hold back tears of happiness when I finally reached James. He recognized me immediately. My poor boy. He was still only 7 years old. Just as if time had stood still since he vanished from the line at the grocery store. I was afraid he would expose me. But his voice was so hoarse and broken when he spoke that even I had trouble hearing what he said. Mom? He wanted to hug me, but I forced myself to push him away. Not now, my sweet boy, I whispered. I love you. I love you. I had to control myself like never before, not to throw my arms around him. Listen, we have to play a game, okay? You have to be quiet. You have to be very, very quiet and not say a word to anyone. Can you do that? Nod if you think that you can do that. He nodded. Okay, good. I sat down and talked a little to the other children as well. There were 6 of them in total. After that, I stood up and joined the soldiers. Still completely disorientated, I spoke up. Listen. They all looked at me. It felt strange to have this kind of attention, and I had to fight a blush appearing in my cheeks. My company was shot down, and I was the only one to survive. But my men didn't die for nothing. We were given very clear orders to protect these children and bring them to a specific location. I'm not at liberty to say why, but given how well our enemies tried to keep them from us, I think you can understand their importance. The soldiers whispered to each other. I was afraid they didn't believe me. One of them spoke up. You weren't sent here by occupying forces, were you? He said. I swallowed nervously, fearing they would execute me just like the general. But he continued with excitement in his eyes. You got directions directly from New Babylon, didn't you? New Babylon? Yes, I said. Of course. The soldiers smiled at each other, and then they all yelled out in unison, For the Emperor! For the Emperor indeed, I said. Our mission is simple. I picked up the note I had been given by the man and read it. We have to bring these children to St. Nicholas Street. The soldiers looked frightened, no one willing to speak. Well, I said, is there a problem? No, ma'am, it's just that, one of the soldiers said. It's just that we came from that area. It's heavily guarded. I see, I said nervously. I know I'm asking a lot of you, but I'll personally make sure the Emperor hears of your bravery. If we succeed with this mission, you'll be remembered as heroes throughout the entire empire. After a lot of discussions, during which I did my best to pretend I knew what I was talking about, we decided to use the captured tank and the other trucks to try some kind of sneak attack. The soldiers who took it upon themselves to drive, dressed in their enemies' uniforms. The rest of us hid away inside the trucks. I decided to join the truck with the children together with the first soldier I had met when I came to this place. A light so bright that it almost turned night into day appeared on the horizon. Everyone stopped for a second. That's the 3rd one this month, one of the soldiers said. You think we finally sacked New York? Another soldier said. Take this, a soldier told me and handed me some kind of automatic rifle. You'll need it. I climbed inside the truck with the children and sat down with my back against the wall. My son approached me, but I gestured him to stop before the soldier joined us. Shortly after, the convoy was on the move. My heartbeat raced in step with the engine of the truck. I couldn't tell minutes from hours. Explosions. Again! It reminded me of fireworks. But now I knew it wasn't. It was the sound of death. We came to a stop. I heard voices. Was this it? "Stop right there!" someone yelled. After that, someone opened fire. I couldn't tell which side started it. The children began to cry. My son ran up to me, craving me. "Everyone out," the soldier who traveled with me said. "We'll have to continue by foot from here." "We must protect the children," I said, naively trying to shout down the gunfire. "We must protect them with our lives." "Yes, ma'am." I picked up my son and tried to convince the other children to exit the truck, but they refused. The young soldier had to force them out. He picked up a little girl and told the other children to stay behind him. And then we jumped out of the truck. I had no idea what waited for us outside, but I trusted the old man. I would know. "Take cover!" the soldier yelled to the children as much to me. We were standing in the middle of a street. I recognized it. The buildings were mostly new, but I still recognized it. One of my customers had lived on this street, but it hadn't been called St. Nicholas Street. The soldiers were taking cover behind cars at the side of the street. Cars that would have looked way more modern than any cars I'd ever seen before, if it wasn't for the fact that they were all burnt. They were shooting at us from the windows. A large American flag hung on one of the facades. "We have to bring the children to the 3rd floor," I said to the soldier carrying the little girl, "and to the door to the left." It felt as if everything happened in slow motion. What the fuck am I doing? I asked myself. Fuck. I looked back at the children, hiding behind the truck. Slowly, our company advanced toward one of the apartment buildings. Number 45 was written over its door. Would the old man be waiting for me behind the door to the left on the 3rd floor? I had no idea, but I kind of expected it. Why would he have lied about meeting me on the other side when he spoke the truth about everything else? "Let's go," the soldier covering me and the children yelled. "Go, go, go!" He ran behind one of the cars closer to the building, and we ran after him. The soldier who had asked about New Babylon had been shot in the head, laying dead in the middle of the street. "Oh my God," I said. "He's dead." "We've lost 5 men so far," the soldier next to me said. "They died for the glory of Persia." I felt a sting of guilt. They hadn't died for whatever they believed in. They had died to help a prostitute save her son. I had ordered them to their death. And however much it scared me, I knew deep inside that I would have ordered 100 more if I had to. A bullet scratched my arm, but the chaos around me and the impact it had on my frantic mind made me not even notice the pain. We moved forward again. I had made sure to run behind all the other children to make sure they would be safe. But before I got to the next car, holding my son in my arms, a series of bullets forced me to run to another car on the other side of the street. Separated from the others, I thought I wouldn't have a chance. But as it turned out, it saved me and my son's life. Just moments later, amid a rain of bullets, a rocket hit the car the rest of the children were hiding behind. I screamed in horror as I watched all of them, including the soldier who gave his life to protect them, go up in flames. At the same time, 3 soldiers, the only 3 left as far as I could see, waved at me from the door to the building. I wasn't that far from them, but it still felt impossible to reach them. But I ran. I held my son as tight as I could, defied every survival instinct in my body, and I ran into the chaos toward the door. Bullets pierced the cars next to me, throwing dust into the air, and ricocheted from the asphalt. But by some miracle, I reached the other soldiers at the door unharmed. We were shot at as soon as we kicked in the door. The firefight echoed in the small staircase. "Cover me!" one of the soldiers yelled at me. I had no choice. I put down my son behind a column, and as soon as the soldier ran toward the elevator, I opened fire on the soldier attacking us from the stairs. The power of my gun took me by surprise, but I didn't let go of it. Every bullet coming out of the barrel shook my tiny body. I screamed like a wild animal as I let hell rain over the people who I assumed must have taken my son from me. When I let go of the trigger, the soldier in the staircase fell dead to the floor, killed by my bullets. I joined the other 2 Persian soldiers in the elevator. "Remember," I said as I pressed the 3rd button, "the door to the left." The elevator slowly moved up. I hid my son behind me. We all pointed our rifles at the door, anticipating anything and everything as soon as the elevator doors opened up. I looked at the display beneath the buttons. 1, 2. I made sure my son stood exactly behind me. And then the soldier next to me opened fire, even before the doors had opened up. And when they did, at least 5 people, scientists in lab coats, lay dead on the floor. One of them, a woman, was still alive. She took cover behind a plastic plant, sobbing. There were 2 doors, one to the right and one to the left. The one I was supposed to open was locked. The woman behind the plant begged us to stop. One of the soldiers pointed his rifle at her, but I ordered him to stand down. "She's not important," I said. "Let's get this door open." It wasn't difficult to get it opened with the help of our guns. The old man was nowhere to be seen inside. I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was some kind of machine with a platform in the center of it and control panels on the sides. "Get the woman," I said. They violently forced her into the room. "What is this?" I yelled at her. "No, no, no," she cried. "It was our only hope." "Tell me," I said furiously. I wasn't going to let myself be stopped now, when I had gotten this far. I would do anything to get my little boy home and safe. "Tell me, or I'll order my men not to kill you, but to keep you alive until they've found your entire family, and then they will force you to watch them being killed, one by one. So you better tell me what this is right now." The terror in her eyes betrayed her. My threat had gotten to her. "It's a TDM," she said. "A temporal displacement machine." "How do you operate it?" "Please," she begged. "Don't force me to." "Tell her, bitch!" one of the soldiers yelled. "It's already been calibrated. All you need to do is type in the date and time over at the panel to the right. 2 keys need to be turned. Then the lithium crystal will activate and send whatever is on the platform to that time." "Where's the keys?" I asked. "They aren't actual keys," she said. "I'm one of the keys. I'll have to put my finger on one of the pads." The other key was Dr. Robert. He's dead outside. But his fingers will still work, right? I asked. Yes, but please. Shut up. I turned to the soldiers. Bring me Dr. Robert's finger. I have a strict order to return this child to his own time. These filthy people kidnapped him, and all the rest. That's what this is all about. Don't you understand? I have to send him back. That's what the Emperor would have wanted. I walked over to the panel and typed in the date and time I had entered the school. One of the soldiers returned with Dr. Robert's finger, and the other one forced the woman to hold her finger on one of the pads. I placed myself on the platform. Please, the woman pleaded. That boy. He's James Cavari. He will... Silent, the soldier said and hit her in the face. It's the will of the Emperor. That was the last I ever saw of them. And the next moment, the woman, the soldiers, the corpses, and all of the explosions far away in the distance was gone. I was standing in an ordinary living room, and I held my son in my arms. When I returned to the school building, the old man was nowhere to be seen. It was as if he had never been there at all. I never got my money he promised me, but he did give me all I needed. He helped me find my son. I haven't been able to figure out who the old man was, but for each year that has passed since all of this happened, my son looks more and more like him, with an identical scar over one of his eyes.